tremendous wonder. "Wait and see," was all the answer he got. "Wait and see." She told him to lie quietly on the bed and to have patience. With asking questions and thinking and wondering, the day passed very quickly. With the lengthening shadows his excitement began to grow. Presently Miss Lake took her departure, and went off to her unknown and mysterious abode. He watched her disappear through the floor with mingled feelings, wondering what would have happened before he saw her again. She gave him a long, last look as she sank away below the boards, but it was a look that brought him fresh courage, and her eyes were happy and smiling. Tingling already with expectancy, he got into the bed and lay down, his brain alive with one word: escape. From where he lay he saw the stars in the narrow strip of sky. He heard the wind whispering in the branches. He even smelt the perfume of the fields and hedges, grass, flowers, dew, and the sweet earth, the odours of freedom. The governess had, for some reason she refused to explain, taken his blouse away with her. For a long time he puzzled over this, seeking reasons and finding none. But while in the act of stroking his bare arms, the pains of the night before suddenly returned to both shoulders at once. Fire seemed to run down his back, splitting his bones apart, and then passed even more quickly than before, leaving him with the same wonderful sensations of lightness and strength. He felt inclined to shout and run and jump, and it was only the memory of the governess's earnest caution to lie quietly that prevented his new emotions passing into acts. With very great effort he lay still all night long, and it was only when the room at last began to get light again that he turned on his side preparatory to getting up. But there was something new, something different. He rested on his elbow, waiting. Something had happened to him. Cautiously he sat on the edge of the bed, and stretched out one foot and touched the floor. Excitement ran through him like a wave. There was a great change, a tremendous change, for as he stepped out gingerly onto the floor, something followed him from the bed. It clung to his back, it touched both shoulders at once, it stroked his ribs and tickled the skin of his arms. Half frightened, he brought the other leg over, and stood boldly upright on both feet, but the weight still clung to his back. He looked over his shoulder. Yes, it was trailing after him from the bed. It was fan-shaped and brilliant in colour. He put out a hand and touched it. It was soft and glossy. Then he took it deliberately between his fingers. It was smooth as velvet, and had numerous tiny ribs running along it. Seizing it at last with all his courage, he pulled it forward in front of him for a better view, only to discover that it would not come out beyond a certain distance, and seemed to have got caught somehow between his shoulders, just where the pains had been. A second pull, more vigorous than the first, showed that it was not caught but fastened to his skin. It divided itself, moreover, into two portions, one half coming from each shoulder. "I do believe they're feathers!" he exclaimed, his eyes almost popping out of his head. Then, with a sudden flash of comprehension, he saw it all, and understood. They were indeed feathers, but they were something more than feathers merely. They were wings. Jimbo caught his breath and stared in silence. He felt dazed. Then, bit by bit, the fragments of the weird mosaic fell into their proper places, and he began to understand. Escape was to be by flight. It filled him with such a whirlwind of delight and excitement that he could scarcely keep from screaming aloud. Lost in wonder, he took a step forward, and watched with bulging eyes how the wings followed him, their tips trailing along the floor. They were a beautiful deep red, and hung down close and warm beside his body, glossy, sleek, magical. And when later the sun burst into the room and turned their colour into living flame, he could not resist the temptation to kiss them. He seized them and rubbed their soft surfaces over his face. Such colours he had never seen before, and he wanted to be sure that they really belonged to him and were intended for actual use. Slowly, without using his hands, he raised them into the air. The effort was a perfectly easy muscular effort from the shoulders that came naturally, though he did not quite understand how he accomplished it. The wings rose in a fine, graceful sweep, curving over his head till the tips of the feathers met, touching the walls as they rose, and almost reaching to the ceiling. He gave a howl of delight, for this sight was more than he could manage without some outlet for his pent-up emotion, and at the same moment the trap-door shot open, and the governess came into the room with such a bang and a clatter that Jimbo knew at once her excitement was as great as his own. In her hand she carried the blouse she had taken away the night before. She held it out to him without a word. Her eyes were shining like electric lamps. In less than a second he had slipped his wings through the neatly made slits, but before he could practice them again, Miss Lake rushed over to him, her face radiant with happiness. "Jimbo, my darling Jimbo!" she cried, and then stopped short, apparently unable to express her emotion. The next instant he was enveloped, wings and all, in a warm confusion of kisses, congratulations, and folds of hood. When they became disentangled again, the governess went down on her knees and made a careful examination. She pulled the wings out to their full extent, and found they stretched about 4.5 feet from tip to tip. "They are beauties," she exclaimed enthusiastically, "and full-grown and strong. I'm not surprised they took so long coming." "Long?" he echoed. "I thought they came awfully quickly." "Not half so quickly as they'll go," she interrupted, adding when she saw his expression of dismay, "I mean, you'll fly like the wind with them." Jimbo was simply breathless with excitement. He wanted to jump out of the window and escape at once. The blue sky and the sunshine and the white clouds sent him an irresistible invitation. He could not wait a minute longer. "Quick!" he cried. "I can't wait. They may go again. Show me how to use them. Oh, do show me." "I'll show you everything in time," she answered. There was something in her voice that made him pause in his excitement. He looked at her in silence for some minute. "But how are you going to escape?" he asked at length. "You haven't got—" He stopped short. The governess stepped back a few paces from him. She threw back the hood from her face. Then she lifted the long black cloak that hung like a cassock almost to her ankles, and had always enveloped her hitherto. Jimbo started. Falling from her shoulders and folding over her hips, he saw the long red feathers similar to his own, and when he dashed forward to touch them with his own hands, he found that they were just as sleek and smooth and glossy as his own. "And you never told me all this time?" he gasped. "It was safer not," she said. "You'd have been stroking and feeling your shoulders the whole time, and the wings might never have come at all." She spread out her wings as they spoke, to their full extent. They were nearly 6 feet across, and the deep crimson on the underside was so exquisite, gleaming in the sunlight, that Jimbo ran in and nestled between the feathers, tickling his cheeks and the fluffy surface, and running his fingers with childish delight along the slender red quills. "You precious child," she said, tenderly folding her wings round him and kissing the top of his head. "Always remember that I really love you. No matter what happens, remember that, and I'll save you." "And we shall escape together?" he asked, submitting for once to the caresses with a good grace. "We shall escape from the empty house together," she replied evasively. "How far we can go after that depends on you." "On me?" If you love me enough, as I love